Why don't you? Yeah. Can we start now? Professor Isaac, can we start now? I suppose. Yeah, it's already 3 o'clock.
Let's start.
Okay. Good afternoon, esteemed Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac, former Finance Minister of Kerala and the distinguished professor of Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, respected Professor M Govinda Rao, the doyen of Indian public finance, whose book we are going to release today and celebrate his 75th year of year. Professor D.K. Srivastava, Honorary Professor, Madras School of Economics and Member Advisory Council of the 15th Finance Commission. Professor Kavita Rao, Director of National Institute of Public Finance and Taxation, New Delhi. Professor Pinaki Chakravarti, a great admirer of Professor Govinda Rao and former Director of NIPFP. Professor D. Narayana, yet another admirer and the former Director of Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation. Professor Bani Murthy, belonging to the same tribe and presently the Vice Chancellor of Base University, Bangalore. Professor Shanmugam, Director of Madras School of Economics. Lega Chakravarti, yet another scholar mentored by Professor Govinda Rao and much appreciated young scholar. My fellow colleagues in Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, scholars, friends of Gulati Institute, colleagues from Madras School of Economics, colleagues from Base University, colleagues from NIPFP, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a very important day for GIFT. Today is a very important day for the scholars of public finance of our country for more than one reason. As far as we are concerned, we are now having the orientation program for the 4th batch of 9 PhD scholars recently joined in the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation. We are today releasing this book jointly with National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, a place where Professor Govinda Rao worked for long years and worked for the country and the institute and deepened our understanding on public finance. And jointly with the Base University, where Professor Banimurthy is the Vice Chancellor, and jointly with the Madras School of Economics, where Professor Govinda Rao is in the Board of Studies and the Board of Governors, and also he's actively involved with their work. So these 3 institutions have joined together to celebrate the work and also the life of the doyen of India's public finance. It is an occasion for us to celebrate. Professor Pinaki, welcome. And my job is here to welcome all of you to this important meeting. As far as I am concerned, as far as GIFT is concerned, this is important because this sends an important learning to the new generation of public finance scholars that we are going to groom. We are trying to expose them to the body of knowledge the kind of people who are involved in this business. And in this process, they will also be knowing what is the process involved in the making of a scholar with PhD rather than a person with PhD alone, because we are having no dearth of PhD and there is an excess supply of PhD, but to what extent PhDs are adding scholarship, that is actually an important question on doubt. So this is a part of orienting our younger generation of future generation of public finance scholars to the business of making scholarship. And at the same time, this is an important day for us because our beloved Professor Govinda Rao, who has given his life for deepening our understanding of the varied and complicated issues of public finance in terms of educating us, in terms of his, I know he has been nurturing the younger generation through the month-long workshop in NIPAP, which he held for many years. And this is also a day to celebrate his 75th year, sir. And I'm extremely happy that to begin with these three institutions, we four are able to do it together. And this is actually a major a manifestation of solidarity. And what brings all of us together is not only our public interest in public finance, but also Professor Govinda Rao is a common factor to all these institutions. For us, Professor Isaac will tell later in many different ways in which he has helped us. Even today, whenever I have a major problem, I always think of requesting the advice of Professor Govinda. So let me take this occasion to, first of all, welcome the Honorable former Finance Minister of our center, of our institute, of our state, Professor Professor M Thomas Isaac, who has kindly agreed to be with us. And he doesn't need an introduction. I'm not going to do that. And I welcome Professor M Thomas Isaac for kindly agreeing to be with us. You know that he has a flight at 6:30, and he has, he's coming after three meetings in the morning, and he has found time to be with us. That is just a manifestation of his commitment to the profession and also his affection towards Professor Govinda Rao. And we welcome Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac to this August meeting. And Professor Govinda Rao, look, thank you very much. When I told you, you had some hesitation, but on my persuasion, and you have agreed to be with us. And I welcome all the three institute directors. When I moted the idea, each one of them kind of came with how to make it do in a better way. Professor Kavita Rao, Professor Shanmugam, and also Professor Bhanimurthy. I welcome all three of you to this meeting. And we have some of the well-wishers and scholars mentored by and associated with and also close friends of Professor Govinda Rao. First of all, we have D.K. Srivastava, and they are good old friends. And I know must be a great reunion, online reunion from them. And they are meeting, I know they are meeting very frequently even otherwise. Professor Srivastava, most warmly on behalf of all of us, all the three institutions, all the four institutions, and all gathered around, and we would like to welcome you. And Professor D. Narayana and Professor Lega Chakravarti and Professor Pinagi Chakravarti. And all of them are the great admirers and those who are learned a lot by interacting with and working with Professor M Govinda Rao. So on behalf of all of us, we welcome you to this meeting, who have agreed to kindly reflect upon his work and life. And that is what is going to be the session all about after release of this book. And finally, and more importantly, I could see number of our friends of GATE. I could see a number of the colleagues and students from the different other three institutions, and my own colleagues and my own students, our own students here. I welcome all of you with these words. I welcome each and every one of you with a lot of affection and a lot of appreciation to this meeting, and request, I would say, Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac to chair and the meeting, and also to say, I'm sorry that our Honorable Finance Minister could not join because of some other very unexpected commitment. Otherwise, he would have been here. So I would like to request Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac to fill that gap also. Over to you, Professor T M Thompson.
Dear Professor Govinda Rao and respected panelists who are going to speak in this session, Dr. Joseph and Dr. A.B. Jose, the former director of GIFT, and dear friends. It's a very great honor to be present at this forum discussing one of your very important contributions to public finance. Personally, not just me, many who are present here have immensely benefited from your work, both intellectually and for me particularly in policy making. To state my experience, my direct relation to public finance is limited to the paper I did in my MA. At Center for Developer Studies, I don't know, for some reason, we don't give that great importance to public finance. So theoretical public finance, my experience, my interest was limited to what Ashok Mitra and I.S. Gulati used to write, because there is a center state financial dimension to it. But things changed once I became the minister in 2006, finance minister. I had to learn the ropes. And your writings did help a lot. Not just writings, you are very generous to spend your time here in this institute, which was at its infancy at that time. You are a member of the governing body. In fact, as you mentioned in your book, you came here for the first Gulati Memorial Lecture, and then you were a member of the governing body. And there is one regret that we accept openly on this occasion. You're fiercely arguing for the autonomy, full autonomy. Well, I couldn't regretfully oblige you that, and you didn't make an issue of it. But I regret that, because 5 years later, you had to walk away. And another 5 years later, I had to pick up the threads from where you left. Well, that's how things go. My second term as finance minister coincided with the new 15th Finance Commission. And we means state level finance ministers generally were very worried about the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission. We thought states were going to get a road deal once again, another major blow. So, with the help of GIFT as an institution, we started a series of dialogues, starting with the meeting of finance ministers in Trivandrum, and then we met in Hyderabad, and Vijayawada. No? Then we went to Pondicherry, Delhi, and so on, a round of going around. And you did spare time to come to most of them and spend time to draft. It was more than an academic interest in what was going on. Immensely value the support you gave, and I want to acknowledge the benefit states got. See, why just one issue, one major issue, I hope you remember, was the terms of reference, which stated if the finance commission was to consider whether the revenue deficit grant was to be considered at all. That is a very, I don't know how terms of reference could have been written in that manner. Well, in fact, in our reply and so on, we have used what you argued. So at the end of all these rounds and so on, what happened is that the Finance Commission not only not pay heed to that, which was our demand. There's a constitutional obligation to look into it. They cannot, no government can say that not to look at all. And therefore, revenue deficit grant came, and that saved the rest of my term as finance minister. Kerala was the biggest beneficiary. It was 50,000 crores of rupees in the first year. We were very, I think, lot of good wishes and who were working along did have an influence in the thinking of the Finance Commission. And of course, it was not all our lobbying. The COVID had changed the whole tenor or the environment in India. Nobody could speak about bringing down the deficit, reducing the fiscal space, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, I think the role you played in helping us, the states, I don't say Kerala, the states who wanted to start a dialogue on this issue was very, very, very important. So it was not just theoretical issues on public finance that you were concerned with, but definitely a major policy orientation to this. And that is the characteristic of this new book which you have released. It calibrates the fiscal policies of state and central government in India to certain major theoretical understandings of impact of public finance on macroeconomics. So a major concern of the book is definitely, fiscal deficit, debt, its sustainability, and a favorite theme that you refer to, the intergenerational equity. Well, this is a very important concern. But sir, if you are looking at intergenerational equity in terms of fiscal deficit, I understand. Suppose you are borrowing and spend it on revenue expenditure, meeting your revenue deficit grant, then future generations would suffer. They are making the sacrifice for our current expenditure. But if the entire borrowing is on, say, creating assets for future, then, well, I think the future generations say more benefits from that than the present. And this is very important because I think you do look at the role of state in the development process. So you can have a concept of an activist state, which at one time was being failed in India, or you can have a minimal state. So it depends upon your concept of the state. You see. And I think that is an important dimension that I would look into. Now the COVID came, as you have examined a special chapter on COVID, that sent all these norms into topsy-turvy, inevitable. COVID is the worst time that you want to think about fiscal stabilization. It's a matter of life and death, and you choose life. That's the most important thing. But your concern is right. Now that period is getting over, we have to consolidate. FRBM acts have been effective to a great extent, but you imply not sufficiently now. Who is the culprit? It's the central government. Central government in this, since 2003-04, when just these laws were passed, not for 1 year complied with any of the FRBM mandates. Their fiscal deficit has ranged between 3.5 and 5. The revenue deficit has been between 2 and 3. While the states, on the other hand, on the eve of COVID, the fiscal deficit had average come down to 2.75, and the revenue deficit positive, nearly surplus, is minus 0.05 on the eve of COVID. And some years even positive. So this is highly a big asymmetry, not only between the power of state and center, but the way this power is being employed. So Dr. Rao's answer to this, response to this, not only in this book, even otherwise, while drafting our memorandum or commenting upon our memorandum to the 15th Finance Commission, the solution lies in the Fiscal Council, where the center can be disciplined. Now, having had the experience of GST Council, how powers that be, because asymmetry of powers that can be manipulated by center, I was at that time also diffident to put it in. But in this book, you strongly argue for that. There has to be a federal institution whose mandate would be to check the powers of the center. They also be made to comply with the law of the land. And so this is the fact. But I won't be alarmed at, say, the fiscal post-COVID conditions, the fiscal situation. It's only natural that fiscal deficit rise, debt GDP ratio rise. Now that your fiscal deficit will come down to 3% per annum and your GDP grow, the debt GDP ratio will come back to normal thing. See, my argument, sir, would be that states on the whole have behaved responsibly. But there are differences, though you don't go into that, very understandably, comparing different states and so. States have on the whole behaved responsibly, but there are outliers. For example, Kerala would be an outlier with the fiscal deficit slightly above 3% in many years. But now that Government of India is taking a serious position, it will come down to 3%. Now there's a huge debate going on extra budgetary borrowing. Well, C&AG has shown that 2019-20, central government's extra budgetary borrowing is 3.17 lakh crores. But that's not considered part of the fiscal deficit of center. But what KIFBI in Kerala has borrowed, they insist being considered as part of the fiscal deficit and for reduction in the future borrowing of the state. These are not issues that you're taking up. But what I wanted to tell was, when the fiscal requirements of region states in India differ, the perspective on development requirements also change. For example, at one time in Kerala, we were emphasizing on, say, social sector development, and it has done good for the state. But now we want to look at our infrastructure deficit. So therefore, we will have to have extra budgetary borrowing, not for current expenditure, but for infrastructure. Now that's because we chose a path of development at one time, and now we want to compensate the problem. The Indian Federation should allow this much fiscal freedom for states. So you have a very, very important three chapters, in fact, on fiscal federalism, where you point out the asymmetry of division of power between the state and center, and how center has made encroachment into this. So I'm drawing from influence from that. All that I'm arguing is that regional aspirations can be different. Indian Federation must accommodate with those regional aspirations. And if one state is outlier while all the states as a whole have behaved responsibly, that should be taken in that spirit of federalism. Sir, this is a very important contribution. I'm certain not only students of public finance, but policymakers like me and so on will benefit from this immensely. Because you have been party to all these discussions, not at state level, at the central level, as a member of Finance Commission. And therefore, you have drawn all this rich experience into this book. Sir, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contributions.
Book. Could you please release the book? Where is the? Hello. Where is? Yeah, I think you may hand over a copy to. You can keep the copy by yourself, Professor Isaac. You will be the best user of that book. Yeah. So, I'm not able to hear you.
Pinaki Leha.
Yeah, they are all there.
So,
all the stars are there.
hand it over to somebody.
Yeah. That is for you. Sir, that's for you.
Let's show it off.
Big book release.
That's it.
You release the book for yourself because we consider you will be the best user of that book. Okay. Okay, I think now we will request. I know that Professor Isaac has also to go. He has a flight at 6 o'clock, but we will continue the discussion about the book and the person because it is. We will honor him at the end. Honoring will be at the end. It's possible that my minister may turn up because honoring will be done by if he turns up. So honoring at later. So maybe shall we now request Professor D.K. Srivastava, one of the longest associates and another doyen of our public finance, to reflect on and enlighten us on the book and your view on the book, and also Professor Govinda Rao as a person at his age 75. He's too young.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Thomas Isaac, Dr. Govinda Rao, Professor Joseph, members of the eminent panel, distinguished participants. It is my pleasure and privilege to have this opportunity to speak briefly about Dr. Govinda Rao as a professional, as a person, and about his latest book. First, let me highlight a few points about his contribution as a professional to the subject of public finance. Some of the aspects that stand out in my mind is Govind's contribution to building up institutions, specializing in the field of public finance and social sciences, like the National Institute of Public Finance and earlier Isaac. Following the traditions set by Dr. Chalaya and Dr. Bagchi, he successfully nurtured the development of NIPFP for 2 terms as director and earlier in various capacities in the NIPFP's professional ladder. His most outstanding contribution, apart from the academic one, in my view, was that he successfully negotiated with the Ministry of Finance for setting up a funded mechanism for NIPFP, which could make it autonomous and financially sustainable, that provided the needed freedom in faculty appointment and choice of research themes. Secondly, it is important to acknowledge his contribution in policy making in the field of public finance and related areas as either chairperson or member of various bodies, including the Finance Commission, the Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister, and various other eminent bodies, including more recently the Advisory Council to the 15th Finance Commission. The third dimension of his contribution emanates from his participation in building up quite successfully a group of eminent researchers in the field of public finance in his capacity as a colleague or a co-author or a co-researcher, or by conducting various high-level training programs and refresher courses. His fourth contribution is in building up a body of scholarly research works in the form of a large number of research articles, report, reference books. In many fields, he made original contributions, including measurement of direct and indirect budgetary subsidies, direct and indirect taxation, public expenditure, fiscal federalism, and sustainability of government debt and deficit. I can say without hesitation that through dedication, consistency, and hard work, he has created for himself an eminent and permanent space in the landscape of the limited number of luminaries of public finance experts, where in that landscape, Dr. Chalaya, Dr. Bakshi, Dr. I.S. Gulati, Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Kelkar, among others, occupy prominent spaces. It would be amiss of me if I do not, at least briefly, recall some of Govinda's personal qualities. He is extremely helpful to his colleagues and friends. He abides by principles of probity and honesty, and he sticks to his stand. I recall that in the early stages of the setting up of NIPFP, I was moving in and out of Delhi time and again. And at that time, NIPFP was in Rajendra Place in Karol Bagh, occupying a modest part of just 2 floors in that building. And whenever I came to Delhi to join NIPFP, I needed to rent out a flat in some nearby area. And every time I approached Govinda, and every time he successfully helped me find a suitable place through his contacts, although he himself was new to that place. From those early days, the present book, Studies in Public Finance, Indian Public Finance, is in fact a mature outcome of years of development of ideas, grappling with public finance theory, empirical constraints, and policy dilemmas. Among others, I would highlight 4 distinguishing features or key attributes of this book. And these are, in my view, first, that it is quite comprehensive, covering all major aspects of public finance and fiscal policy, including public expenditure, taxation, fiscal federalism, and sustainability of debt and deficit. Second is the fact that this book is highly policy oriented. It draws examples from actual policy dilemmas that India faced from time to time, and provides his valuable insights. Textbook discussions of public finance do not prepare public finance scholars in the intricacies of policy making. And in that respect, this book actually makes a very significant contribution. The third dimension is that this book addresses contemporary themes, bringing the reader up to date on current and ongoing fiscal issues, like the chapter on public finance in pandemic times, which the chairman alluded to, and the practical complexity of formulating and implementing a highly complex and incomplete goods and services tax, especially the emphasis on continuing distortions that he highlights time and again. And fourth is the fact that this book provides rare insights, particularly in relation to two aspects. First, the emphasis on the political economy dimensions of public finance. And second, the distinction, the importance of the distinction between two critical traditions of this field, namely public finance vis-a-vis public choice. And these are very insightful discussions that he covers in this book, reminiscent of the great debate that happened between Richard Musgrave and James Buchanan in Germany, in the University of Munich, about these two traditions. And I can't help but recall two famous insights that they provided. Whereas Musgrave defended the growth of public sector as, quote, price we pay for civilization. And Buchanan blamed the democratic politics for a bloated public sector. Dr. Govinda Rao deals with this complex subject with considerable clarity and authority. I commend this book to budding scholars of public finance in India, as well as accomplished researchers and seasoned policymakers. I thank you very much.
Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Srivastava. You could not have better expressed your personal inclination, association with our dear Govinda Rao, and also you could not have better highlighted the key aspects of this book. Thank you very much. Now, may I request Professor Govinda Rao, Director of National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, to make her intervention.
Dr. Joseph, thank you very much. Dr. Thomas, Dr. Govinda Rao, Dr. Joseph, my colleagues, my friends from NIPFP and everywhere else. It's a little awkward to be sitting in this chair of being called the director of NIPFP because apart from the fact that
your mic has a problem, Professor Govinda Rao. Mic has some problem.
Okay,
Audio,
let me
check it. We should have checked earlier. I'm sorry. I should have checked earlier. Just check it. It's now.
I'm working with the mic of.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else can start, and I'll come back.
Okay. I think you take your time now.
That might be better.
That's better. Sorry that I should have checked it earlier. I'm sorry.
That's
Yeah. May I now request Professor Pinaki Chakravarti?
Thank you, Professor Joseph, Professor Thomas Isaac, Dr. Govinda Rao, Professor Srivastava, Dr. Kavita Rao, Dr. Bhanumurthy, Dr. Lekha Chakravarti, and my friends from GIFT, dear students. I am really delighted to be here today. And this is really a great occasion because when we talked over phone, Professor Joseph told me that we are not only releasing the book, we are also celebrating Dr. Rao's 75th birthday. And then subsequently, I had a chat with Dr. Rao, and Dr. Rao said that there will be global announcement that I have become old. I wanted to say that you have not become old, sir, and you have been very active scholars. I think you have retired from NIPP in 2012, and then after Finance Commission, you have been continuously writing. And this book is a major contribution to the work on public finance in India. Why this book is important? I'd say three very important reasons, according to for three very important reasons. The first, I think we do not have too many, great work on India's public finance. I think that way these books makes a very important contribution. Second is, as Isaac mentioned, also Professor Srivastava mentioned, I think the understanding of, dealing with, understanding of the policy when you deal with it on a day-to-day basis, the flair you get when you read that book is something which is just not possible by looking at secondary data or literature. So that way, that this is a very important understanding, that it gives you a great understanding of what is happening in Indian economy, particularly in the area of public finance. The third important contribution I think this book makes is also discuss about also discussion about discusses the book the book discusses the current fiscal and macro policy issues and what are its dimensions. So that way, these three very important aspects of the book I thought I should mention. I am not going into the details of the book because all of us have read the book and been and benefited immensely from the writings of Dr. Rao. And also, I would like to mention couple of issues for to get his views, because currently we are grappling with so many issues. I think state finances have received unprecedented attention in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, and we have been discussing about what states should do, what centers should do in terms of transfers, subsidies, etc. freebies. So how do you see these things affecting federal fiscal relationships going forward? That second issue is about the issue of I think globally, I think it's not only in India. Globally, there is a pushback in terms of compliance with a fiscal responsibility and budget management. Not act even. I am thinking even the idea. I think in many places we were seeing this, that it really doesn't matter. It is time to spend, but at the same time we see globally there has been an increase in debt, elevated level of debt, elevated levels of debt servicing obligations, and is there. Are we going to, when we talk about new normal? So are we really talking about a fiscal policy which will continue to have an elevated level of debt? Recent IMF study says that till to 26, 27, the global debt is not going to come down. So in such a situation, how do we see this rising debt servicing cost, and the conflicting and competing priorities for development? And I think many questions and concerns that have been raised in the last couple of months on what states should do, what centers should do, also arises from that arises because there is a concern in terms of availability of primary fiscal space in the context of elevated levels of debt and deficit. Second issue, I thought the book makes a very important contribution in terms of future of in terms of GST, its operation, and how it should move. But I also feel that we are talking about tax harmonization versus fiscal autonomy, and what kind of reform that GST probably can think of, which can actually ensure a bit of flexibility, little bit of autonomy, and yet remain in a harmonized, yet follow the harmonized principle of taxation. And the last point that I wanted to talk about is the issues on federalism. I think Dr. Rao's work on federalism, I don't need to specifically mention here. Everybody knows about it. His enormous contribution to the subject, and we all learned from that. And it will be very nice to get your views, sir, on how do you see federalism taking shape in India as we move forward. At a personal level, I think I have been an immense, I have got immense personal support from Dr. Rao in 1993 when Dr. Reddy sent me, Dr. Gulati sent me to NIPFP. I was working with, for my MPhil with Dr. Gulati and Dr. Isaac. Both of them told me that you should go to Delhi and meet 10 Finance Commission people and also visit NIPFP. So I came to NIPFP, I met Dr. Bakchi, and Dr. Bakchi asked me to meet Dr. Rao. So I gave him my proposal, MPhil proposal, which was, of course, I understand it was not written very well. So I just joined MPhil and Dr. Rao read the proposal. It was not a very bad, good proposal. So maybe the second cut or third cut. And next day morning, he asked me to come. So next day morning, I went. Each page he had commented. And then he took me to the library and said that since you are a Bengali, you eat a lot of fish. This is the fishing rod. So he showed me the finance accounts and he said, also start fishing so that you don't have to come to data to Delhi because all these finance accounts are available in CDS library. So that was an eye opener. So that was and that's the time when I first time met Dr. Rao, and then I met him when he became the director of NIPFP in 2003. And then we were colleagues for, I think, more than 12 years, if we take the 14th Finance Commission also. So thank you very much, sir, for all the support, all the cooperation, all the things that you have done for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pinaki. That was a very personalized account on a magnum opus, and a reflection on the doyen of India's public finance. May I request now Professor Kavita Rao? Professor Kavita Rao? I found her. Yeah, no. Professor Kavita, hello. She's maybe she got disconnected, I suppose. Maybe she may be trying from another room or something. In between, then may I request Professor Narayana?
Thank you, Joseph. Respected Chair, Dr. Thomas Isaac, Professor Govinda Rao, distinguished panelists, students. It's a great honor to get an opportunity to talk at Govinda Rao's book release, which doubles as Govinda Rao at 75. I would begin by saying, grit and determination, thy name, Govinda. Why I am saying it? Let me take you back to the 1960s of South Canada. That's the current Dakshin Kannada and Udupi of today. Interestingly, the district, even in the 1960s, almost every town had a arts and science college. I don't think many districts had that distinction. And many of those are small towns even today, except Mangalore and Udupi. They are not very large that way. And they were all private institutions, except the government college in Mangalore. And owned by different communities. That speaks volumes about that region. Students had an opportunity to study after their intermediate. And this was greatly aided by an excellent public transportation system, largely owned by private owners. And if there is a tarred road, you had a bus service. So almost from every nook and corner, students could somehow come to the college, finish their BA, BSc or BCom, and only a small proportion went on to do their MA because most of these colleges didn't have postgraduate degrees. And in fact, the college where Dr. Rao studied, even today, it doesn't have an MA, only an MA in computer science. That's the only MA it has. So But fortunately, a large proportion of the students who completed their BA, BSc and all, that was also the period, the 60s and 70s, the phenomenal expansion of the banks. And 6 of these 19 nationalized banks came from that region. So they provided employment. And that was actually the preferred employment. In fact, anybody going to do an MA or to talk about research, I think it was unheard of. And people often look down upon, oh, what is this fellow going to do? What research? Such a bank job and, reasonably good income. So even going to do an MA was not considered very great those days. I can speak with some authority because I also come from that region and have suffered some of these things. There was also an economic reason for not doing, going for post-graduation. Postgraduate education those days, especially in economics, is confined to just Dharwad, Bangalore, and Mysore. And to study there, you have to stay in hostels. That means money. And in Dr. Rao's case, his father said he cannot afford paying for correct me if I'm wrong. So, but fortunately for Dr. Rao, his elder brother was employed in Ahmedabad. So I think, Professor U.R. Rao, you must have heard of that name. And it opened a window for him to venture out to Gujarat University to do his MA, where the teaching was in Gujarati. Any fickle-minded would have run off, but not Dr. Rao. As far as his initial, doing his MA, sort of. Now let me turn to his academic beginnings. I wish to spend a few minutes on it, basically to send a strong message to our own PhD students and PG departments and institutes here. We have to learn a few lessons from Rao's early experience. Rao's academic beginnings have to be seen in conjunction with Dr. Lakdawala taking over as a director of Sardar Patel Institute, simultaneously being appointed as emeritus professor at Gujarat University. And Dr. Lakdawala saw some spark in Govinda Rao while teaching in the MA class, offered him a research assistant post in the institute, and got him to work on their project on commodity taxation in India. This is a subject which has stayed with him till today. As you can see, Gujarat University appointing Dr. Lakdawala as emeritus professor played a very key part in this, because some of these coincidences do play a very, very important role. Now, Dr. S.P. Gupta, a student of Helen Peacock and Jack Weissman, two public finance stalwarts joining the institute, and Govinda Rao working with him on the project, determinants of fiscal capacities and needs and the implications for federal transfers, took him to the next level. But Dr. Gupta moved to the newly set up Sambalpur University in Orissa, taking Rao along as a PhD student. His PhD topic, determinants of tax revenue and non-planned revenue expenditure of the states in Indian Federation, a time series analysis, had its roots in that project which he did. It was probably one of the first exercises in political economy that used rigorous statistical techniques to test the impact of political stability and ideological leanings of the party in power on fiscal variables. This was in the mid-1970s, and Rao was far ahead of his times. I am saying this because in the early 1990s, when I introduced time series analysis as part of the quantitative methods course for the MPhil students in CDS, the students submitted a memorandum to the director saying that Dr. Narayana is creating trouble, bringing in unnecessary topics and things of that sort. Anyway, but what happened was Professor P.S. George, who had just come from Professor Rangarajan's department in IIM Ahmedabad, he just looked at the students and he said, I know what Dr. Narayana is doing. You get lost. don't come with this sort of a thing, you know. That is what saved George's support. I'm mentioning it because Dr. Rao's analysis was in 1975, you know, mid 70s. And I was trying to introduce this in the early 1990s in CDS. So you're far ahead of your times. And what Rao did with his thesis is also a good lesson for our PhD students. The high point of the thesis was the paper on ideological leanings, political stability, and tax revenue determination in the journal Public Finance. Another on the expenditure side in Economic and Political Weekly. Based on the understanding gained, he published a series of critical comments in Public Finance on a study by Roy Ball and Velayudan Pillai on allocative effects of intergovernmental grants, the case of India. He also wrote a paper in EPW, Intergovernmental Transfers in India, the Performance of 6 Finance Commissions. These papers firmly established him in the area of public finance. So, you know, I am mentioning it in some great detail so that, you know, you are a large number of PhD students here. So these are some of the lessons that you need to learn from it. Now, Rao built on this foundation working with Dr. Raja Chelaya at NIPFP. His postdoc experience at University of Maryland and the opportunity to closely interact with Professor Wallace Oates on fiscal federalism and Professor Mankar Olson on public choice theory brought different perspectives to his research, which you often see in his writings. And in fact, Dr. Isaac referred to that, and others also. Professor Oates was his supervisor, and Olson was curious to know about India, having read quite a lot of Indian history. Interactions with Professor Oates and Olson, two towering personalities in public economics, shaped his thoughts a great deal. There is a lot to learn from all these experiences, and I can go on, but there are others better qualified to talk about this. My close interaction with him began when I was selected as director of Gulati Institute. He was in the selection committee. Professor Rao, Pulin Nayak, and myself, we prepared a document on the academic staff structure of GIFT. I do not know what happened to that after, because I was sent off soon after. And he was a well-wisher of me and the institute. He stood with me during those difficult times. And it continued later when we did all those meetings on the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission that Dr. Thomas Isaac was referring to. That was during my second innings in Gulati Institute, and in fact, even beyond that. It greatly helped that Dr. Rao had a keen interest in Kerala finances since his PhD days, because his thesis, you know, had 4 states taken up for study, and Kerala was one of them. So that interest, that actually is a, you know, it was a great help to all of us. Now, turning to the book, of course, I've written a bit, but I'm not going to cover all that. I just want to make 1 or 2 points. The first point is that it's a timely volume and fills a major gap. It is no surprise that Professor Rangarajan called it, I'm quoting, a truly comprehensive book on India's public finance. The word comprehensive is significant. If you look at the books on Indian public finance, what you find is that Raja Chelaya's fiscal policy in underdeveloped countries came out in the 60s. And after about 20 years, trends and issues in Indian federal finance in 1981. In 1993, State Finances in India by Amresh Bagchi came out, followed by his edited volume, which is called Readings in Public Finance in 2005. The lack of comprehensive books is clearly evident. All that we have to do is look at the reading list of Delhi University's current public finance course of BA. I could not find a single Indian book in it. There were, of course, 2 papers of Professor Rao in the list. One of them being the chapter in Amresh Bhakti's Readings in Public Finance. So a text for reference has been an unfilled gap, and this book just fills that very nicely, very comprehensively. And I'm quoting Professor Rangarajan. And of course, I have a lot of points about the chapters, but I'm not getting into all that to save time. But what I like the most in chapter 6, that in fact, Dr. Isaac referred to it, the chapter 6 is on deficits and debt, is the rigorous discussion of the independent fiscal institutions. The beauty of it is that it crisply brings together the worldwide experience, clearly distinguishes the fiscal council's independence from that of the independence of the central bank on one side, and how its functions are different from that of the controller and auditor general. Now that's a very, very important, it's in all, I think in about 2-3 pages, it does all this so beautifully. That's why it's a very crisp sort of a thing. I have to mention something else. That's a characteristic of Professor Rao. Now the book ends with a tight discussion of Indian public finance in pandemic times, which Dr. Isaac referred to. But then Isaac didn't refer to something else, but I want to refer to that. The recommendations are brief, direct, and blunt. Let me just quote 2 sentences. I quote, "One of the areas which requires immediate action is to reverse the protectionist stance the government has increasingly been adopting during the last 4 years. There have been across the board increases in import duties and non-tariff barriers. The decision not to join RCEP is retrograde." In about 3 sentences, very simple sentences, but direct and very blunt. I don't think many others could write, so well. That's Now, I want to make another very important point about the book. That the point I wish to make is the following. You are what you read. One look at the reference list will tell you how Rao became what he is. I did a frequency count of the references. Out of the 180 references listed in the book, leaving out Rao's papers, 19 papers, and Government of India reports, 13, who are the other names? Richard Byrd, 9 references, Albert Breton, 7, Oates, 6, Olson, 2 are the major names. Of course, Buchanan, Musgrave, Amresh Bhakti, Raja Chelaya are all there. 2, 3 sort of references. It's very important for all of you to learn these things. You are what you read. I think somebody else also made that point in the morning or yesterday, I don't remember. Now let me end by making a slightly sort of a different point. Take it on a lighter note, but the book, how even the most meticulous are not spared by typos and auto-corrections of MS Word. Let me point to a few. On page 77, a statesman-like, it should be statesman-like, but these words are too, then, and on page 234, instead of import duties, it becomes important duties. Then important substation. There are a few others. I'm not going to list all that. And there are some similar problems in some of the tables also. Tables 5.2, 8.2, 8.3. I'm mentioning this because you see, if there is a second edition, if you want any help, I'll go through it very carefully, put down all these things and take my word, I'll, point out these corrections. I wish you many more years of happy, productive life.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Narayana, for that highly educative account of Professor Govinda Rao as a person, and also the importance of his contribution by locating the current work, his magnum opus, I would say, in the context of the existing understanding. I was told that these typos have already been identified, and we had a discussion. The edition is now, I think it's out, I suppose. The first edition is not available to the market. These corrections, in fact, Professor Rao told me about it. In fact, some typos have been located and they are being corrected. Okay, now may I now invite our dear Professor Govinda Rao to reflect.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. Technology hopefully will be kinder to me this time. I hope you can hear me.
You are very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Thomas, Dr. Govinda Rao, Dr. Srivastav, my friends Pinaki and Lekha, Dr. Shanmugam. It is with great pleasure and great joy that I join all of you in. It sounds childish, but to wish Dr. Govinda Rao a very happy birthday. It sounds like a kid, right? But I guess it is interesting to reveal that I have known him since when I was a kid, and so I take the liberty of wishing him accordingly. I would like to sort of spin the light on Dr. Rao in a slightly different way. Until I finished my PhD, I had studied very little public finance. And this is also true for a large number of the people who join NIPFP with specializations which vary from core public finance. So my PhD was on dual economy models. It was on Indian economy, interactions between agriculture and industry. And I joined NIPFP knowing very little about public finance, except for what we studied in college. And so there's a sharp, steep learning curve, right? But the learning curve is hugely helped, hugely supported by the fact that we have people like Dr. Rao in the institute. Then he used to be professor at the institute when I first joined, and everybody, a lot of the youngsters in the institute take great pride in referring to the fact that you could take a topic to him and come away with a reading list which will be very comprehensive, which starts you off on this whole journey of trying to learn what you're trying to learn. So, and as if for all who have had a chance to flip through the book, that is amply reflected in how each of these chapters comes with its background of the conceptual ideas before they get applied to the context of the Indian fiscal space. So it is very interesting. It is exciting for potential young students as well as for people who've been in this space for some time to get a volume which we can rely on in order to refresh, in order to do a quick review of areas that we haven't been actively working on. So kudos to Dr. Rao on such a wonderful volume. There are two chapters that I wanted to look at a little closely because I have been working on taxations ever since joining the institute. And so I will limit my comments to these two chapters. The comments are not necessarily questions, but they try to draw the attention of we, the readers, to a few interesting and important aspects. There was a paper that I had the occasion of co-authoring with Dr. Rao on the Indian tax system. And at that point, which is almost 17 years ago, we were talking about direct taxes not being a very large part of total tax revenues, and developing countries being hindered by the fact that depend more on indirect taxes than on direct taxes. Interestingly, over the course of the last 15 years, India has now evolved to a situation where direct taxes in central government revenues account for little more than the indirect taxes. And more interestingly, in the last 2 years, courtesy COVID and everything else that's happened before, last financial year, personal income taxes have matched corporate taxes. So as a country, that is an interesting milestone to cross. And that is also a result of the way policies have evolved over the years. The important question that gets raised, and that is center stage in the chapter on taxes, the first chapter on taxes in the book, is the question of how to raise tax to GDP ratio. This is a question that has bugged the policymakers in the country for last 50 years, I would say. And all tax reforms commissions have been trying to address and answer this question. The last Finance Commission devotes quite a few pages trying to analyze what is the feasible tax to GDP ratio for the country. And so Dr. Rao does a very interesting discussion on different methodologies used in order to understand where tax to GDP ratio can be hoped to be pegged at, given everything else, given the structure of the economy, given the size of the economy, the level of development, and so on. There is a lot of discussion on changes in tax policy and in reforms on tax administration. What I find interesting is that the literature is evolving in two interesting directions, which I think in future we'll see a little more work, and I thought I'll flag it for researchers who would be of it, who would like to explore the space. The first space in which literature seems to be expanding is trying to. So the question is the tax to GDP ratio predictable and dependent on prefixed set of variables, which is what all the econometrics is trying to do, right? So the one direction in which literature seems to be moving is to identify episodes of sharp increase in tax to GDP ratio and explore what changes could have driven that increase. And that is moving away from econometrics per se, but trying to look at case study approaches to tax reforms. The other interesting aspect, which I think in India we haven't done much work and which should be finding some more traction, is exploring other factors that influence tax compliance, tax morale, social norms, and perceptions on government spending. There is an evolving little stream of literature about whether people's perceptions on government spending will influence compliance. So I think we'll see many more, a lot more work in this space, and we'll all look to Dr. Rao to provide us more guidance on how to take work forward. On the other chapter on taxes, on GST, the book provides an exhaustive overview of the introduction of the regime and its evolution thereon. It is a controversial regime. It is beginning to show better revenue performance, and therefore I think people are breathing a sigh of relief that you don't need major disruptions. But there are interesting issues that have been flagged. One interesting issue I think that is important for policy making is the appropriateness of choosing a threshold, an appropriate threshold. Trying to find the trade-off between having a low threshold and hence ensuring a large number of taxpayers are in the base, or finding a suitably high threshold where you can ensure better administration and better compliance. And this is a discussion that has oft happened, but in the context of GST, we have tried to adopt, to the extent possible, the existing regime so as to have as little disruption as possible. So I think this is one interesting issue that will see some more policy attention in times to come. The other issue that Dr. Rao flags in a way, but I think he alludes to needs more attention in the GST structure is does revenues and does economic performance respond to changes in tax rates? So can we measure the elasticity of demand for different commodities and therefore calibrate taxes to maximize revenues or minimize the distortions? In the context of GST, we have once again adopted a historical regime, which with very little changes. It is timely to go back to the drawing board on the rates, and as Dr. Rao says in many places in the book, there is the tyranny of the status quo. So to try and get out of status quo is a tough challenge. But going forward, if GST is supposed to deliver the gains that we hope it will deliver, and given the transition we are in at, where we have just come out of the compensation period, it is important for GST Council to go back and look at elasticities of demand, and it is important for students and researchers in this field as well to ask ourselves whether it's feasible and practical to calibrate elasticities and define tax rates, or whether we should be looking at the merits of going towards fewer rates and therefore more simple and basic structures. So I will stop at that. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. I was hoping to see a discussion on social contract between the state and the citizen. And I would hope that Dr. Rao in a later piece will spend some time educating us on that. Thank you very much. Dr. Joseph, you're muted.
Thank you very much for those personalized and at the same time highly professional remarks. And now may I invite Professor Enna Bhanumurthy, Vice Chancellor of this University, Bangalore.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Joseph.
Yeah.
Professor Thomas Isaac, Professor Govinda Rao, fellow panelists, the faculty of GIFT, and my student friends. It's a privilege to be part of this event. In fact, 3 days ago, we had a similar event at IIM Bangalore, where we had a book release, and I had a privilege to be part of that panel discussion also. So I'm sure Dr. Rao knows what I'm going to speak, but this is basically for all of us to just understand what Professor Govinda Rao's contributions. So I thought, let me repeat some of the things that I said in IIM Bangalore, but then at the same time, some things I've added by reading some of other chapters in the book. So it's a privilege to be part of this event of Professor Govinda Rao's new book on studies in Indian public finance. Dr. Rao has been one of the foremost leading experts in fiscal policy studies in India. During his 5 decades long career, Dr. Rao has contributed immensely in each and every sub-themes of Indian public finance research as well as policy. This book is an outcome of his recent writings on the themes such as public expenditures, government revenues, macro fiscal frameworks, intergovernmental fiscal transfers, fiscal federalism, and also on COVID and post-COVID fiscal policies. But this is a very small part of a huge contributions that Dr. Rao has made to this Indian public finance literature. Indeed, if one brings out his collected essays, there could be at least a dozen volumes could be brought out, and many of them are still have contemporary relevance. Dr. Rao's contribution do not limit to research writings. As he mentions in the preface, Dr. Rao worked hard to build research capacity in the country by introducing summer refresher course in public finance and personally supervising this course. Indeed, this course has been imitated by IGADR on monetary policy also, at the request of Reserve Bank of India. He also guided, encouraged, and mentored many scholars to take up fiscal policy studies, and I happen to be one of them, beneficiaries of Dr. Rao. In fact, I am the only one person who benefited from Dr. Rao's leadership in both the institutions, in ISAC as well as in NIPFP. And just as a matter of information, now that GIFT is also starting PhD program, Dr. Rao started in ISAC a very nice concept, like we had a biannual conferences for all the PhD students. Sorry, PhD scholars, but I want to tell that it's a very painful thing, but in the long run, you will really benefit. And I would urge Dr. Joseph also to introduce that concept. In fact, it's successfully running for almost 20 years right now. Every 6 months, you have a PhD presentations. In fact, there are experts who are coming from outside, and all of us actually benefited from that. In fact, it used to be like 2 weeks mela of presentations of PhD scholars. So I think that is something that we really benefited a lot in being part of ISAC. Before joined NIPFP, I was not exposed to fiscal policy at all. He has introduced us to fiscal policy, macro fiscal analysis, and some of the outcomes of those analyses was actually used for public policy, such as successive finance commissions, fiscal FRBM roadmap, fiscal monetary coordination, and undertaking simulations for the 12th five-year plans. At some point, Dr. Rao also suggested us to take a work on fiscal multipliers. And in 2012, when we did this, it was the first study. And after 10 years, we are surprised that that work has become the basis for post-COVID union budgets, where the government adopted the strategy of focusing on capital expenditures to revive the economy. We are really grateful to Dr. Rao and his mentorship, and he has just completed 75 years, and we wish him many more productive years. In fact, perhaps after Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Rao is the most prolific writer at this age, and we pray that he continue to write and guide the country for many more years to come. The book, when it comes to the book, actually there are 9 chapters. I'm sure all of you have gone through that. But it comes under 4 broad themes. That is, one is on public expenditure, public revenues, debt and deficits, and intergovernmental fiscal transfers. I looked at a couple of chapters a little more carefully because that's my interest. That's on debt and deficits, and targeting debt and deficits have become the most important issue in the post-reform fiscal policy in India. It has so much theoretical foundations and equally empirical literature as well. Dr. Rao very eloquently reviews both the aspects in the chapter 6. The chapter neatly brings out the linkage between debt stock and deficit flows and the conditions under which the debt levels could be reduced. He argues that there is a need for countercyclical policies to ensure debt sustainability. In fact, he gives 4 reasons why government should be watchful of fiscal deficits. In fact, the reason that he says that fiscal debts should adds to debt, increase interest burden, crowd out productive expenditures, lead to financial crowd out of private investments, and so on. In fact, he gives examples from India for all the 4 issues and suggests that the 1991 crisis was due to negligence of some of those reasons. And he explains similar experiences during early 2000s, where the fiscal deficit went back to double digits. The chapter also explains how the FRBM Act is enacted, the background, as well as its success. Dr. Rao suggests that while FRBM has brought in some discipline, it was only short-lived. The chapter also explains how the 3% target is fixed, and I'm glad the chapter do not refer to Maastricht Treaty. I mean, many people think that it has come from Maastricht Treaty, but it certainly doesn't refer to that. I'm also told that there was a nice story behind this, whether there should be a numerical fiscal target be fixed. The E.S. Sharma committee, where Dr. Y.V. Reddy and Dr. Ashok Lahiri was part of it, in that Dr. Reddy felt that while there is a need for a nominal limit for fiscal deficit, what is even more important is the mode of financing the fiscal deficit and the use that the resources so raised are put to, as Dr. Isaac also pointed out in the beginning. Later, it was in the 12th Finance Commission that gave the justification for 3% and added this part of the recommendation. The chapter also explains further developments on FRBM in the successive Finance Commission. In fact, however, I thought there is some missing link. I mean, we already discussed during my IIM discussions. Between the 13th and 14th Finance Commission, there was another committee headed by Dr. Kelkar in 2012 to redraw the FRBM for the next 5 years up to 2016-17. And this was, as it is, retained by the 14th Finance Commission and mostly continued the 2016-17 numbers for the rest of the period. Overall, I would say that the 14th Finance Commission recommendations, in which Dr. Rao was member, has made a great contributions in balancing the union and state fiscal relations. Now, the Encasing Committee, which came in 2017, ignores many anticipated expenditures, especially due to SDGs and all those things. They were suggesting only the glide paths. We also had this fashion of talking about glide paths when it comes to the inflation targeting. Monetary policy was also talking glide paths, but it's unfortunate that the glide paths also get into the fiscal policy. And as Rao mentioned, there are many unanticipated risks to the FRBM roadmaps. In this context, some of us were suggesting for a flexible fiscal targets. Indeed, it could have been more appropriate, especially when we have a flexible inflation targeting. I'm not sure whether flexible inflation targeting regime consistent with the fixed FRBM targets. I'm also aware of Dr. Rao's position on this aspect, but I thought to highlight this issue for the benefit of the audience here. Now, on the FRBM Act, we have come to a situation, there is a dilution of the Act with revenue deficit no more a target, thus risking the quality of government expenditures. Indeed, our work for the 15th Finance Commission showed that dilution of the FRBM Act would risk GDP growth of the country at least by 1.5 percentage point on an average for the 15th Finance Commission period, and thus resulting to widening of public debt rather than declining as the Finance Commission has actually recommended. Dr. Rao also explains how the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, and public debt are related and are linked to the growth prospects as well. Here, one aspect I thought to draw the attention of everyone is in India, we have three definitions of public debt. We get from IPFS, a government debt paper, and also from the RBI. So we are not very sure what to target actually. With respect to the success of FRBM Act, Dr. Rao highlights this in the page 138, why FRBM is only successful in the initial stages and later not. There he also brings out the issue of not accounting for contingent liabilities, the role of weakening fiscal marksmanship, etc. Why some of the reasons why the FRBM Act actually not succeeded. Perhaps we may need to ask a question, whether should we continue to have the FRBM Act more than fiscal deficit or revenue deficit. In our view, it is important to target public debt. We have suggested to the 14th Finance Commission that FRBM may be renamed as Debt Sustainability and Budget Management Act, and Finance Commission did include this as one of the recommendations, and this was actually reiterated by the 15th Finance Commission, but still not accepted by the Minister of Finance. Dr. Rao talks about freebies much before the current debate actually got in. In fact, in page number 142 and 143, there are 2 pages he speaks about what is so-called freebies. And although he doesn't use the word freebies, for this he suggests for a very strong independent fiscal institutions and devotes a whole section on this. Successive finance commissions have suggested for having such institutions, and it's important to look at what 14th Finance Commission has actually recommended. Here, I must also refer to Dr. Rao's earlier work on estimating implicit subsidies. That was a pioneering work, conceptually very strong, and I'm sure it could help the ongoing debate on the freebies. Somewhere I get a feeling that many important recommendations of the 14th Finance Commission seems to have been diluted by the 15th Finance Commission in terms of reference and other. On fiscal federalism, the book reviews the chronology of developments in India. Indeed, he highlights 5 developments and expresses anguish that Indian federalism needs much more to succeed in its objectives. He highlights all those 5 developments in page number 173 and 174. One major view is that Indian federalism failed to decentralize below the state level. Here he also brings out the role of Niti Aayog, but I personally felt that Dr. Rao was holding his views on the Niti Aayog, the whole set of Niti Aayog. There is also a discussion on GST Council in that chapter. However, it's not clear what is his views on the 14% assured revenues, which some felt as GST birth defect. On public expenditures and revenues, Dr. Rao focuses more on productivity of spending as well as revenues. I think that's the way we should get in right now. He argues that focusing merely on expenditures may be misplaced. On the revenues also, he argues reintroduction of import tariffs seems to have led to reduced competitiveness and thus revenues. He talks about retrospective taxation episode and how it reduced the predictability of tax policy also in the revenues chapter. In summary, I can only say that this book discusses a range of developments in Indian public finance in the last 5 decades, during which period, perhaps after Dr. Chelaya, Dr. Rao has been at the center of these developments. And as Dr. Rao himself says in his preface, I quote, "When you come to the end of a venture, you feel that much more remains to be done, and I alone am responsible for this feeling," unquote. We wish that Dr. Rao, with his writings, continue to guide the public policy making in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banamurthy. I think it was a very candid exposition, and it is by now all the speakers have conveyed the message that for anyone entering into the area of public finance, it will be rather impossible to ignore Professor Govinda Rao, and he will definitely be sitting in the footnotes of everyone. So let me now invite Professor Shanmugam, Director, Madras Profit. Over to you, Professor Shanmugam.
Thank you. Respected Professor Thomas Isaac, respected Professor Govinda Rao, distinguished panelists, faculty, and research scholars of Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, and special invitees. It is indeed a great privilege for me to be part of and one of the speakers of this special event celebrating Professor Rao's 75th birth anniversary and releasing his latest book, Studies in Indian Public Finance, published by Oxford University Press. Almost all my all earlier speakers and next speaker have worked at NIPFP, and they are former colleagues of Dr. Rao. Unfortunately, I missed that opportunity of working at NIPFP, but I got an opportunity to learn Indian public finance from late Dr. Raja Chelaya, who was the mentor of Professor Govinda Rao. Till 1995, I joined MSc. Public finance was not my favorite subject. One of the reasons was that that subject was not taught properly at the college and university level in our state. When Dr. Chelaya asked me to learn public finance, because he wanted my assistance for his research activities, particularly for research projects, I requested him to suggest some good references in that area. You know, at the time, there was no internet connectivity or online access of materials. He said, look for books, monographs, working papers, or articles published by Professor Govinda Rao. So this is the way I started reading this material. At the time, I felt after reading some of his publications that his works are completely unique with a commanding language. They are well articulated and expertly written. They express even complicated problems in a manner intelligible to even the layman. In fact, I benefited much from his writings and publications. Later, I had an opportunity to meet regularly whenever we visit Madras School of Economics. He has been the board of governors, one of the board of governors of Madras School of Economics. Currently, he is the member of the Executive Council of MSc and member of the Advisory Council to the Center of Public Finance at Madras School of Economics. In all our meetings, he used to be the first person to make comment on our presentations made, mostly appreciating the work and find out what are the flaws and provide useful comments for further improvement. Last year, he mentioned that his book is going to be published by Oxford University soon. Immediately, I got the title of the book and included as a main text reference for public economics course for both MA and BA programs at our institute. Recently, I had a quick reading of his book, Studies in Indian Public Finance, the copy which was available at our chairman, Dr. C. Rangarajan's office. It might be a specimen copy. I read it quickly. What can I say about this book? There are no words, just applause. It is such a great piece of research. It is amazing. It is the best book on Indian public finance. It has 9 chapters and each chapter is like a gem. The book covers the entire spectrum of issues of Indian public finance, starting from the role of government, public expenditure trends and their allocative and technical efficiency, tax design and reforms, GST issues, deficit and debt problems of both state government and central governments, Indian Federation, intergovernmental transfer, and Indian public finance at the time of the pandemic. In each chapter, for each issue, the book provides the theoretical foundations, views of the proponents in that area in their own words, relevance, design in the Indian context, reforms, existing problems, and then useful suggestions. As is all previous writings, this book is also well written, articulated well. The language is lucid. It is a complete and perfect book for students, researchers, policymakers, politicians, and even for general public for understanding Indian public finance. The book is a provocative one. Without much mathematical equations and complicated charts, it explains the complicated theoretical arguments in a very simple, descriptive way, so that any layman can understand the complicated problems relating to Indian public finance. Everyone should read this book. I'm sure that the reader will feel that it is like a storybook. It is not like a complicated economic textbook. The book basically provides a clear answer to much of the complicated problems relating to Indian public finance. It talks about assigning the functions to different layers of government. The assigning function is like assigning property rights. It talks about market failure, which provide justification for public provision. People who benefit from public services should pay for them. Public provision does not mean that it should be public production. If private sector can provide such services more efficiently, then the targeted people can be given cash vouchers to choose their purchase from alternative producers. Now, many of them are talking about the state autonomy and so on. These books clearly demonstrate that our Indian states generate about 38% of the revenue, but they spend more than 60% of the total expenditure. The book also says that the role of the government is determined through the political science. So that is the reason why nowadays many courts are interfering about the decisions of these politicians. It talks about the problems of fiscal deficit and public debt. When fiscal deficit increases, either there will be excess savings over investment or balance of payment problem. Financing fiscal deficit through monetization can lead to high inflation. It also shows that the public debt levels of both the central government and the state governments are at an unsustainable level. Equalization transfer is the solution to provide equal amount of services to all the citizens of this country. I can add many more because of the time constraint. I would say that everyone should read this book at least once. In addition, I have a request to Professor Rao. Professor Rao should write a book on public economics. He explained all the theories relating to taxation, expenditure, deficit financing, intergovernmental relations, etc. Like the way he has written these studies in Indian public finance, so that many students of economics globally will benefit. Finally, I wish Professor Govinda Rao a long, healthy, and prosperous life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Shanmugam. I think each chapter in the book is like a gem. So better you buy it, borrow it, or steal it, but you read it. I think this is the best marketing word. And you are also requesting for another book. Perhaps we all can come together to release that book again, and maybe another occasion for all of us to meet again. So thank you very much. Now, the most important person of the day, Professor Lekha Chakravarty. Over to you, Lekha.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's my privilege and honor to be the part of this panel. And thank you so much for inviting me. A special thanks to Professor Joseph. And, it's a nostalgic moment for me because I worked with, Govind sir around 10 years. And I traveled with him to many countries, including Morocco, two major cities in Morocco, Rabat and Casablanca, to Paris, and to, Philippines, not only to Manila, but we have taken a ship, a flight, and a bus. I think in one day, through all the modes of transport, we traveled to a commune in Philippines. And in all these journeys, I have closely watched the way he conducted the meetings at all the tiers of government, and the way he has, moved the policy prescriptions at the local level, whether it is regarding a pork barrel funds or whether it is regarding identifying the needs at local level. It was a learning experience for me. And, the biggest takeaway is when you have budget constraints at the local level, what is a kind of fiscal flexibility you can apply at the local level? That was the beautiful learning experience when I traveled with him in all these countries. And that project, was related to gender-aware human development as well. So within this masculine perspectives of public finance, how can the soft sectors like gender can be integrated in the public finance? It was a learning experience for me when I traveled with him to all these cities, communes, rural and urban. Thank you so much, sir. And I also remember the way we walked after our dinner and the way you have listened to my emotional issues regarding professional or personal, and also the kind of confusions I had, and the way you have consoled me. And everything is very much there in my mind. And thank you so much for this book. It's an important contribution, not only for the students and academia, but for the public policy makers. You have begun in our institute an important program for the senior IAS officers on fiscal policy and macroeconomic management. And Bhanu has been the course director in the preliminary year. Then I have taken it over and ran that program for 7 years. And in that program, every policy maker, across country, when they came for the program, they looked for a document like this, what you have produced right now, a document which can they readily refer to regarding the theories, regarding the empirics and the data analysis and the policy prescriptions. So that journey, you have given beautifully in this book. And thank you so much for, writing down this book. But certain gaps or certain beautiful discussions you had with us in an IPFP, those discussions, maybe it's another book for you to write regarding the decentralization. And you sent me to the International Institute of Public Finance Conference. There I met Professor Musgrave. I was talking about the fiscal decentralization to him, and especially the kind of planning process that's happening, in the context of Kerala. Then Musgrave, he shrewdly mentioned that fiscal decentralization is a rightist process. So I was arguing with him regarding what has happened in my own home state, Kerala. But he was telling that in this market-oriented decentralization process, it's becoming a rightist process. So, these kinds of exposure you have given me by sending me to various forums. Right now, when I became the part of that organization, I humbly remember the way you have guided me to come up to this position as a member of the governing board of IIPF. And in the book, my co-panelists have focused on many aspects, and I don't want to revisit many of them, and they have preempted also many of the questions I have for you. But I would love to highlight certain points, like Professor Isaac pointed out, what's the relevance of the institutional reforms like fiscal council right now, because we are now grappling with very high fiscal deficit and high public debt. And the consolation is that we are keeping the fiscal policy accommodative in the time of pandemic and in the time of geopolitical uncertainties. But as we go along, we need to find a medium-term fiscal consolidation path. So what it could be, like we will go back to a suffocating 3% in the future, or even including the budget transparency issues by including the off-budget liabilities. Are we going to settle down to a ratio of 4.5? So these are the concerns I have. Or can we, substantiate that? Let there be high fiscal deficit or high debt, but use it for reducing the output cap and also for enhancing the public expenditure in infrastructure, because infrastructure crowd in private investment. And in this area, our finance minister also repeatedly pointed out that if it is used for capital infrastructure, let there be high fiscal deficit, don't fear deficit. But at the same time, there is a tendency now in our country to nudge the subnational governments to go ahead in the market to find their fiscal space. But that was not the case so far. So in your book, I was trying to identify what's a solution for this, because earlier, macroeconomic stabilization was the function of center government. But now the macroeconomic uncertainties, the states are equally exposed to. And given the hard budget constraints at the state level, what is the solution for that when the center government, not just the state governments, to go ahead with facing the market uncertainties and to find their fiscal space. At the same time, we have the threshold 3%, that rule like it's a sword in front of us. So I'm little confused about the statement whether we can boldly say that fiscal deficit is good or deficit is good, not only in the times of pandemic or geopolitical uncertainties, but if you can substantiate the use of deficit, then can we, get away with the threshold ratios of deficit which is suffocating the fiscal space at the center and the state governments. And, Dr. Professor D. Narayana mentioned about Albert Breton. And I do remember our discussions about Albert Breton and how he has influenced your thought process and the way you had very healthy debates with him on the competitive federalism and cooperative federalism. And I do remember learning from you the kind of Salmon mechanisms, the Peary Salmon mechanisms you talked about. But in the contemporary Indian economy, in the contemporary Indian public finance, I would love to hear from you the kind of application of the Salmon mechanisms, whether we can benchmark certain jurisdictions or certain best practices and work towards that, or the kind of cooperative federalism mostly we are managing through the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. And I do also remember the kind of debate we had regarding financing human development issues, whether it can be a part of intergovernmental fiscal transfers. And you were very vocal in saying that don't play around with unconditional grants by integrating human development criteria in the formula-based fiscal transfers, but you can go ahead with conditional transfers. But with the climate change as a part of, the TOR of the finance commissions, we have gone ahead with incorporating, climate change as a mandate or as a part of unconditional transfers. So I would love to hear the evolution in your thought process regarding complicating, that's a word you use, don't complicate the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. It has to be based on offsetting fiscal disabilities, but not more than that. The primary objective of the IGFT is to offset fiscal disabilities. We cannot complicate that further with climate change. But, having said that, I also remember your contributions in environmental federalism and, Wallace Oates influenced your thought process regarding, taking the fiscal federalism ahead to, environmental federalism. And I know that, I remember that you initiated that project in our institute on environmental federalism. And this year, India is going to produce the first, adaptation communication statement in November, because we have committed to the Glasgow commitments. Given that backdrop, would love to know about your perspectives about, the climate change commitments and what's the kind of fiscal instruments and the role of environmental federalism in tackling the climate change commitments. Because one clear answer, a transparent answer, is to start a climate responsive budgeting statement at the center government and the state levels as a long-term public financial management tool. But, beyond that, what it could be, because we have committed to net zero carbon emissions and we have committed to just transition. So I would love to hear your thoughts about the climate change in public finance, as well as the kind of these are the quick points I noted down from reading the book. And thank you so much for giving this book, and not only on the contemporary Indian public finance, but you have taken the theories and the data analysis and the policy prescriptions. It is meticulously done in each of the chapters, and I enjoyed reading that roving bandit and stationary bandit stories of Olson. You have told me in person. I remembered those stories, and thank you so much once again, and wish you all success and peace and happiness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lekha. Your tribute to your mentor could not have been better, and the appraisal of the book also, and the list of questions could not have been longer. Thank you very much. Now, I think we have to hear from the star of the day. May I invite Professor M Govinda Rao for his response. I think Professor Isaac Mashek, how long you can be here, because you have your flight at 6:30. Hello, Professor Isaac, how long will you be able to stay back with us?
5:15. I can listen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Listen to him.
Okay. I think, yeah. I think Thank you. Now over to Professor Govinda Rao.
Professor Isaac, Professor Srivastava, the directors of the three institutions, Joseph, Bhanumurthy, Kavita, and Shanmugam, Pinaki, Dr. Narayana, Dr. Jose, Lekha, and Dr. All the invitees. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been associated with this institute for long. In fact, even before it became Gulat Institute.
Yes.
In fact, recently,
Yes.
Joseph called some Thanu Pillai, who used to be, who is in
First registrar.
Thanu Pillai spoke to me because at that time he wanted some guidance, and at that time he had come to NIPFP. I was a professor. I used to help him around that time. Now, first of all, let me apologize. My profound apologies. You've been very kind and generous in the praise for the book, but there are a large number of editorial problems. Now, you expect Oxford University Press to do a good job, but then they didn't do a good job. They have already, the book is coming for the second print. The book has been exhausted, first print has been exhausted. It's coming for the second print, and I have made somewhere about 250 corrections. And and it's already, in practice, this morning I replied to the editor, say editing is done in London. So I replied to the editor saying that because of this, the change, there have been page changes in the index. So I had to make those corrections as well. Possibly this weekend I will send it back, and in another 15 days, the second print is likely to come. It is going to be printed there. So in the meantime, let me profusely apologize for torturing you with, it's an unkindest cut, if you want to say, because there are some sentences which are not complete. So anyway, whatever it is, but it gives the message, but then it needs to be cleaned up, which will be done very soon. You have all been very, very generous and kind.
People like Dinarayana
understand. You have been very kind. You see, after all, I did what others have done, and then maybe, my own thoughts. It's Bernard Shaw who said he is taller than Shakespeare because he's standing on his shoulders. Basically, so it's basically that to the extent that I understand, and I used that, and then wrote this book. Now, there are a number of issues. There are a number of controversial issues. In fact, the chapter begins. The book begins with the role of the state. If you really want to talk about the present discussion on freebies, you have got to go back and then understand what actually the state does is different from what it is. After all, state comes in where the markets fail in a capitalist economy. The market failure can be a variety of different types. There are, you have a pure public good. There are questions of externalities. Basically the Puggian type of externalities, where you may have to subsidize. Now, that cannot be considered as a freebie, because you think that there is social benefits are much larger than the private benefit, and therefore you want to do this thing. But then when you are doing subsidies, if there is this thing is the one of the important areas where the market fail is redistribution. Markets don't redistribute. So obviously redistribution is an important thing. Now the question here is whether you want to subsidize a commodity or whether you want to give a cash transfer. You subsidize, you don't give electricity, you don't charge for electricity. Punjab's electricity bill that is given up is 2.5% of GSDP. Now, the money that comes by way from everyone, I mean, that is not going to generate the rate of, return that would help in, setting off your, the burden of debt. So, I mean, as in so the basic issue that one talks about is the role of the state. And then, of course, there is a very clear case for redistribution, how you want to redistribute. But then there is also an issue, a major issue, which I just want to flag it here. Role of the state intervention does not mean everywhere the government has to spend. There is a huge role for regulation. In the process of, you think that you own it up, you control it, and therefore you don't need to regulate it. It is important to regulate, all the private sector to perform efficiently. I mean, there has to be a proper competition in the market. So in the name of saying that, no, we don't want competition, so we will own it and we will run the thing. Government doesn't have the comparative advantage to do that. Government should really, and in the process, you ignore the entire regulation, and then that creates a whole lot of other problems. Anyway, I mean, I start with that. Now, given the shortage of time, Professor Thomas will have to go. I have four, issues that I want to flag. He referred to the issue of intergenerational equity, which is, and I in fact go through the old, explanation between Lerner and Buchanan. What is called the vulgar opinion of the classicals, and then new orthodoxy by the Keynesians. And then ultimately Buchanan comes to the conclusion that ultimately it is the vulgar opinion that is the correct opinion. But then even in the Buchanan's this thing, if a borrowing is done, the crucial thing that he brings about is an opportunity cost. When the government takes away the borrowing space and then makes this thing, there is an opportunity cost. Now, the intergenerational inequity will not be there, provided that money is used properly for generate the rate of return, which is adequate to, which will service the debt and then, help in the repayment of the debt. So the issue is very clear. But then, if you are borrowing, as I said, for giving all sorts of things, farm loan waiver or power subsidy and this and that is not going to generate the rate of return. And obviously, your next generation will have to bear the burden of that. The pure and simple issue that flagged is here. Now, and again, this is not something which is a general proposition, but there may be pandemic times. During pandemic times, obviously, some of these things you will have to appropriately adopt. But as a general part of the rule, one of the problems with the government, unlike the private sector, it doesn't perform, it goes bankrupt. Government doesn't go bankrupt. Somebody else will come and bail it out. And no fear of bankruptcy doesn't really give sufficient incentive for them to be efficient. I'm not saying that this government or that government, I'm not even talking about this, even the center. Ultimately, it was in, it was the center at that time, in 2008, who did the farm loan waiver. Farm loan waiver, the expansion of national, this employment guarantee for the whole country, and pay commission recommendation. These are the three. Until then, your fiscal plan was going on well. These three things actually, in fact, we haven't recovered from that. So this is an issue not for the center plus a state. And and then there was also some other question that came up in this thing. Actually, Lekha mentioned that. Redistribution and stabilization, if you look at the fiscal federalism, broadly, it's not exclusively, broadly a central function. Price, control of prices, you have to have one, money supply authority. Controlling prices has to be done throughout the country. Employment, local problems will be there, but by and large, it has to be the responsibility of the central government. Now, so if that is the case, then it will have to basically look at overall situation and within the overall perspective that one has. Similarly, redistribution. Much of that is the reason why you have much of the expenditure comes from the local, because allocation is basically the subnational function. Redistribution because the incentive problem. If you ask any state whether you want to redistribute, they would want all the capitalists to come into their place and not poor people. So basically you need, but then this is not exclusively a central function, because financing of redistribution, financing of poverty alleviation has to be done at the center, and the implementation has to be done at the subnational level, at the local level, because center doesn't know who the poor are. They don't know what what policies are relevant for a particular place in terms of alleviating poverty. So this has to be, that is the place. In fact, Rubenfeld basically writes in an article in Journal of Economic Perspective, it's a place where you have a cooperative federalism should be work where both have to work in unison. But anyway, I will not go further on that issue of intergenerational. I entirely agree with you. If borrowing leads to creation of assets, borrowing leads to additional income creation so that you can service the debt in the future, there is no intergeneration inequity, this thing. Now the Fiscal Council, whether it is a FRBM Act or any other thing, if the government has a political willingness, you don't need it. If the government doesn't have a political willingness, even if you have it, it won't work. But so in that sense, it is neither necessary nor a sufficient condition, but it helps. Why it helps? In fact, if you go through the Constitution, there is a provision in the Constitution which says that the Parliament can actually put the restrictions on the amount of money that can be borrowed. You don't need an FRBM Act. I mean, in fact, it's been pointed out in the 14th Finance Commission's report. But then government never bothered about it. Parliament never cared for it. Similarly, FRBM limits also, Parliament doesn't care for it. They have been continuously violating, particularly at the center.
I think, sir, your answer to Professor Thomas Isaac is over. I think we will continue.
I'll quickly finish it. I'll finish it very quickly. But then, just as in the case of FRBM Act, Fiscal Council helps. Why? It's an independent council. It's like a congressional budget office in the US. Office of Budget Accountability. Many other countries have parliamentary budget offices. Now, this has to be done. The FRBM Act has to be amended to create an independent council. Now, it's not a silver bullet, as I said. But at the same time, you have to be reporting every time that what are the three major things that I say there? One, budget estimates, the wrong things are done straight from the forecasting. The tax terrorism starts there. You estimate project higher revenues, give targets to the commissionerates. Those fellows, without really sort of caring about, just go about slapping the income tax. And then if you go to the tribunal, you have to pay 20% of the tax upfront. And then you can work on the tribunal. 75% of the cases in the tribunal are decided in the favor of SSCs. 80% in the high courts are decided in favor of SSCs. And another 80% is decided in the favor of the Supreme Court. So which means that basically they have been doing this. This is one. Forecasting. Second thing, monitoring the fiscal progress as the thing goes on and reporting to the parliament and the press both. And so these are the third thing is, you know it well, sir. Every politician has a habit of making announcements. I will do this, I will do this, I will one rank, one pension, this, that, and 100 other things. I'm not talking about the state or this thing. It's a general issue. And nobody really works out what the total liability to the taxpayer is at the end of the day. And somebody has to do that. And the Fiscal Council should say, okay, if you have one rank, one pension, this is it. If this is the total amount of this is a definition, this is the concept, and this is the total amount of money that you will have to spend. And so this, at least people will know that when an announcement is given, there is a commensurate cost involved in that. This is a minimalist thing. I mean, there are 15th Finance Commission has given much more. And the 13th Finance Commission started off saying that Finance Ministry will appoint an expert group which will convert itself into a fiscal council. I mean, a player cannot be an umpire. Finance Ministry appointing somebody and then that is becoming a fiscal council doesn't happen. It's not loose. The same thing was made, sort of in the FRBM review committee. And it is the 14th Finance Commission where I was the one who was vehemently argued that this is not meant for just state or I mean, my thing was only for the center at that time. But because I was more concerned about the central profit getting because that impacts the whole country. Now, of course, 15th Finance Commission has said both the things. That's the second issue that I want to have. And the third thing is, I mean, what is it that extra budgetary borrowing? Now, you see, at the end of the day, one has to keep a tab on what is really happening. As I said, the productive expenditure, there are ways of dealing with that, but then at least a total volume of what is a total stock of things has to be known and it has to be published. And what if it is a contingent liability, it should be reported. That is necessary for macroeconomic stability. Nothing more than that, I would say.
I've absolutely no quarrel with you on that. But then it should be transparent. The states have to publish it along with the budget documents, and there should be open discussion on that. But in the center, you permit them to borrow outside your fiscal deficit. Now they want to put this into your fiscal deficit in Kerala.
Absolutely.
That's
the center should do it. They have to do it first because that is a much more serious issue.
You cannot say you can fix a date for future. This should be so both for center and states. That's the problem. See, the asymmetry in dealing with the transactions of center and the state.
Actually, the liability from the contingent liability is the probability of that liability not probably you should assign multiply this thing with the probability that you will not be able to pay, and that you will get.
So I would add on say this is an issue. There must be a federal discussion on this.
Absolutely.
What is off-budget borrowing? What is extra budgetary borrowing? What is the transactional public sector borrowing? It's not clear what it is all about. So you cannot arbitrarily take an action unilaterally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And on this, I also have another problem. This is last one I will pick.
You have to honor this additional responsibility for you.
See, you must excuse me. I cannot miss my flight.
No, please, these are all not necessary.
No. This is our pleasure.
Thank you, sir. 12 seconds. For this birthday.
Oh.
Sir, announce it online. I think people are waiting. 75.
Yes. So, in between the speech reply, we are going to have a cake cutting ceremony for 75th birthday. Yeah. Yes. Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Even
much younger than you.
No, and that.
Okay, that's great.
Yes.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Okay, sir. Great. I think you should rush now at your flight. Say wrong time.
Pinaki,
Incidentally,
Yeah.
Pinaki.
Isaac,
Yes, I can. I hope I can meet you tomorrow evening. Lekha also. Are you free?
yes, yes, I'm
Yeah.
free.
Tomorrow.
incidentally, this is not my birthday. Okay, now, and again, I'm not even 75. You know, I was too mischievous when I was young. So my mother decided that I should be sent to school early. And they said that you have to have this must be your age. They manipulated the age and then made me 1 year, added 1 year to me. So
Earlier this used to happen, no?
yeah, keep it. Can I have it? Tissue or something?
Tissue paper.
Okay.
പുറത്ത് വെച്ചിട്ട് നമുക്ക്
No, yeah, I think we will.
I
I think we'll have a
leave.
small break and we'll reassemble.
No, no,
We'll have dinner here. And okay.
അവരോടൊക്കെ പറയണ്ടോ?
Okay.
Let me finish.
Let me finish. Please.
I have
Yeah.
something to say.
Please complete that.
I'll bless them because let them not make them wait. Friends, let me resume. I'm most grateful to DK because DK Srivastava. In fact, not many people know when I joined NIPFP on 5th December 1977. Some of you might not have been born on that. So when I joined, I was told that I should be working with DK Srivastava. This was the project on, basically, book that, the name of the book that was mentioned on basically the fiscal federalism work. We were doing this work for something like 7th Finance Commission. And of course, DK Srivastava left after a few days. And that was a very brief period. Later, he went to finish his PhD. And then later he came back and then this thing. So we had we were sort of together for some time afterwards. And then I think I left for Australia and things like that. So the association has been very old. And then, of course, by, there has been a lot of cooperation in that sense of the term. And he has been very generous in this thing. But as I said, there are issues that need to be corrected, which I intend to do, address very soon. Now, as I mentioned, the freebies is an issue which, ultimately there is an opportunity cost. For any expenditure that you do, somebody has to pay. There is an opportunity cost. And when you have that opportunity, and, again, there are two issues. Do the courts have any role in this? See, lawmaking is the job of the parliamentarians and legislators. The courts have no business to do the lawmaking. They are supposed to be basically interpreting the, sort of making judgments on the law that is made. So that is one issue that, we don't, it's very clear. They may comment, they may lament, they may say something, but then I don't think they can give a judgment on that. This is my view on the subject. Now, what is, after all, in a democracy, political parties basically spend where they can get re-elected. So each political party basically tries to do that. And then as researchers, what we need to do is to expose, saying that if you do this, this is the consequence that will happen. As I mentioned in Punjab, the water table has gone down extremely badly. The cropping pattern, which the viable cropping pattern which would have happened in the absence of this subsidies, has been completely distorted now. And then, the crop diversification and things like that do not happen. So when you subsidize, you have unintended consequences because you are changing the relative prices. Instead, as I said, if the farmers are worse off and then need to be, you can give PM Kisan you have started, you can actually make it a much more targeted PM Kisan thing you can do. The whole lot of things relating to the minimum support price, fertilizer subsidy. I mean, all these complications need not come. And fertilizer subsidy is a major miss. In fact, Dr. Manmohan Singh had asked me to look at it when I was in the advisory council. And there are 5 categories of fertilizer companies. Pre-92 naphtha based, post-92 naphtha based, pre-92 gas based, post-92 gas based, and a combination of those. And for each category of fertilizer company, they basically work out the average cost of producing urea. And once average cost is, they work it. So you decide the price at which urea has to be sold. The difference between the two will be the fertilizer subsidy given to the farmer, which means that the most efficient fertilizer company gets the least incentive or least this thing. Perverse. The issue of the impact of that is on the investment in fertilizer companies. So you continue to depend upon import of fertilizer companies. See, when you go on doing, sort of this subsidy, there are implications on that. And that has to be understood. And that is the reason why people say give cash transfers. The point is redistribution is important. Punjab fellows will say that we are feeding the whole country. As if, Punjab doesn't produce wheat. We don't get any chapatis at home. I mean, obviously and once a wrong decision is taken, it is very difficult to correct it. This is what Richard Bird talks about when he talks about GST. As a compromise, you make some wrong decisions. Then it becomes extremely difficult to change it. Sort of that's one of the issues. And so when you give again, there is a question. When you give, in fact, Dr. Reddy used to say this. When you give an incentive to an industry, you say it's an incentive. When you give something to a poor man, you say that it is a freebie. Basically, so you do have problems of that nature. And then there is another thing that happens. I mean, I'll talk about it later. Bhanumurthy, he wants a flexible target. I have already answered him that day. Targets are already flexible. In fact, there was a NK Singh review committee. So that see, I mean, if the income levels, decline by more than X percentage successively in 2 quarters, then you can relax this particular thing. Now, but then you also need to, I mean, this is a specific term of reference given to the FRBM review committee. At the end of the day, they decided that they will have this done, but then there are exceptional circumstances, they will do the thing. Now, 14% extra. I mean, if you really look at the previous, for GST compensation, if you really look at the previous 5 years or previous 3 years or previous 10 years, there is no state which had you had a growth of 14% of the revenue from the merged taxes in GST. But that was a bribe given to the states to agree. They said that you agree to this particular reform, and so we will give you this generous offer. Once you give that, then you can't get back and say that, no, there is an act of God now. I mean, these are some of the, I mean, it's a question of federal commitment. And then you come up and say, the poor fellow who gave the commitment died. and the new finance minister comes and then does that. And this thing, it doesn't happen that way. And Lekha, I just want you to read page number 125 in the book. I think that's something which is in vendor 125. There is a statement by Martin Feldstein.
Yeah.
And Feldstein says, there is an interesting, he says, fiscal deficits are like obesity. Fiscal deficits are like obesity. You can see your weight rising on the scale and notice that your clothing size is increasing. But there is no sense of urgency in dealing with the problem. That is so, even though the long-term consequences of being overweight include an increased risk of a sudden heart attack, as well as various chronic conditions like diabetes, like obesity, government deficits are the results of too much of self-indulgent living, as the government spends more than it collects in taxes. And also like obesity, the more severe the problem, the harder it is to correct. The overweight man has a harder time doing the exercise than could reduce his weight. That could reduce his weight. And the economy with a large deficit and debt is trapped by increasing interest payments that cause the deficit and debt to rise more quickly. The initial response to you, I have already mentioned when I gave the response to this thing. Now, you can have more and more deficit, but how much? Somewhere around the line, you have got to have it down the line. If you are borrowing money for productive purposes, creating assets, there is no problem. If you don't, then like obesity, you are going to have trouble. Somebody has to pay. There is no free lunch to be had. Somebody has to pay, and that has to be understood very clearly. Now that's what I wanted to tell you. And on the other things, yes, we did one of the things that I had. I still remember advised her strongly is that there is a lot of exercise going on gender budgeting, which is very important. There is no question. I said there should be a new meaning of gender budgeting, and that is, what are the programs and policies that can help to empower women? And then work out the cost of that and put that into the budget. Make advocacy to put that into the budget, rather than saying, taking the budget and this is a woman's expenditure, this is a man's expenditure, and then classifying them. So that 3.5% of the budget is for women. So what? Is more? Is it less? What are the policy implications? Instead, you say that taking water, providing water in the Rajasthan area will help enormously the women. Giving gas, will enormously help women. So what is the budget that is required for the purpose, and how we can actually do the advocacy to? That's something which I still, remember. And of course, Loika has done a tremendous amount of work on that, on issues relating to gender equality and this thing. And then, of course, on issue of climate change, 14th Finance Commission was the first one, which instead of giving separate grants for forest cover, it said it's a part of the tax devolution formula. Mind you, if you say that you have an instrument and then you have a target, Finance Commission is not the one which is supposed to be bringing about, sort of climate change. There are a host of other policies that you have to use. Finance Commission's, sort of this thing is limited. Remit is limited. It is to see basically, sort of drawing the balance between the union and the states in terms of their responsibilities and resources they have. Now, to the extent that, sort of you have to take care of, responsibilities, whatever are required for, climate change, that has to be worked out by the union government and say that this is the amount of money we need for climate change. or the state government saying that climate change is important and this is the amount of money, and the Finance Commission will have to take that into account in estimating the expenditure requirements. But I mean, it doesn't have a remit either in the Constitution, because the Constitution itself tells you what the Finance Commission is supposed to be doing, and it has to come under any other matter in the interest of sound finance. So first of all, you have to say it is in the interest of sound finance, and that you can say. But the basic issue is the requirement for that has to come, because the Finance Commission don't determine the terms of reference. It is basic terms of reference in Article 280 was given in the Constitution. And that includes 280 number 1, distribution of taxes that must be collected, that may be collected, and the shares of individual states. Number 2, grants need to be given to the states. Number 3, measures to augment the consolidated fund of the state to supplement the resources of local governments based on the recommendations of the State Finance Commission. And number 4, any other matter with the sound finance. And that any other matter has to come from the presidential terms of reference. And over a period of time, a lot of politicization happened in the presidential terms of reference, because there is a lot of nudging of the Finance Commission. You do this, you do this, you don't give revenue deficit grants, etc., etc. And possibly one of the Finance Commission, possibly if it had come to 14th Finance Commission, he would have said that, you see, I think this type of nudging is inappropriate. Never in the history of the Finance Commissions that previous Finance Commission's recommendations were asked to be reviewed by the next Finance Commission. But anyway, I mean, it was a great experience working with in the 14th Finance Commission, extremely bright people like Abhijit Sen, for example. I mean, one of the sharpest persons I have come across. In fact, we used to have a lot of discussion on that. Or Dr. Reddy, for that matter. Very fine. And first question we asked in the first meeting was that, have you worked anywhere in the state? The first question, have you worked, any of you have worked in the state? So I said, I have worked on the state. I said, I'm not asking you whether you have worked on the states. Have you worked in the states? Now, anyway, as I said, I can go on, but, I promise Narayana that in the next print that comes out, you will not have the problems that you have faced. And again, apologies for that. And so one of the things that I would like to very strongly suggest to all these youngsters is that I think, years ago, Montek wrote a nice paper on state finances in India, and which is also similar around the same time as I wrote a paper on state finances in India. I think it's an important area where many of the issues of the state finances will have to be flagged, will have to be understood, will have to be brought out. And this is a vacuum. My book doesn't talk about, it talks about federalism and things like that. It doesn't talk about the state finances, the type of problems that you have. The other thing is that in this Kerala, we don't talk much about, we are all proud of our local government, self-government things. But then there is, today or tomorrow, you have to be concerned about one thing. There is a birth defect in the 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment. There's a huge birth defect. Now, the birth defect is that entry 5 of the state list basically tells in the Constitution says that local government is the responsibility of the state government. And then you said 73rd, 74th Amendment says that this is, the rural local bodies and urban local bodies are recognized. That basically, and then you have 11th schedule and 12th schedule, which basically gives a list of items which that state may consider devolving it to the local bodies. They can also give other things. They may consider it giving. What does it mean? Any change that you want to bring about at the urban local body level or rural local body has to be approved by the state government. There is no item of revenue that has been given to the state government. That has been given to the local government. The state government has to pass it on. Property tax, if you want to levy, that the proposal will have to go to the state, state has to approve, and then how is it a government, local government? It doesn't, where is the local self-government, the powers given to it? The state government continues to have it. Now, there may be good state government, there may be bad state government. There may be people who think that there are dangers of decentralization. There is a paper on this by Remy Prajum. The title of the paper is Dangers of Decentralization. So, nobody trusts the local governments. You ask a bureaucrat in Delhi, they don't know, they don't have the capacity, they are corrupt. I mean, these are some of the arguments that goes on. So I think much more needs to be done at the subnational level. In fact, you ask somebody a very serious question. I try to answer that in the book. What is the difference between decentralization and federalism? I mean, you talk about federalism. What is the difference between decentralization and federalism? There is a very quotation by Wallace Oates, which basically says that all governments are federal. It's a question of degree of decentralization. But then you ask a political scientist, he says that they should be coordinated, federal units should be coordinated and independent. There is no country in the world where the federal units are coordinated and independent. It's difficult. Kenneth Ware makes that. I mean, this discussion has gone on. And again, there is a beautiful paper which I quote by Albert Britton. And in fact, we used to be very good friends. He's no longer there. You'll say, Govinda, it's a very interesting thing. You'll tell, what is this? Please see my paper in Publius 2001. There is a journal called Publius, the Journal of Federalism. What he says is that existentialism is the most important thing. Permanency. Decentralization can be removed tomorrow. You can make it extend. Whereas federalism, there are checks and balances against removal of, in safeguarding the interests of that. The question then comes, is India federal? These are the ways we have to ask this question. Is India federal? I am afraid not. Article 3 of the Constitution says that you can change the name of the state, you can join two or more states into one, you can break a state into two, you can do virtually anything. Only thing that you are required to do is, after the issue is passed in the parliament, the state government should be asked whether, this is the proposal we have, what do you have to say, their opinion. You don't have to listen to their opinion, you just have to ask them. And they, for example, when the Andhra was bifurcated into Andhra and Telangana, Andhra Pradesh said, no, we don't want to be separated. No, but then they said they went ahead and then separated it. So the question is, the permanency is not a given fact. Your state comes, but then in the short run, you can't change it. In that sense of the term, there is you can say there is a more federal spirit in what the thing is. But basically, if you see, I had a lot of discussion on this with Albert. Whether we agreed that, yes, there is a gray area. But then, these are basic questions that we need to pose and then answer. I don't want to go on, and I don't think I have satisfied everybody. And thanks to all of you for taking the pains. The fact that you don't have any book, that's one of the reasons why I produced it. I also did not go into the question of proofs and then proving things and this and that. I wanted to get more an intuitive understanding of a thing rather than, you can go into the question of Samuelson's theorem. Samuelson theory and public goods. I mean, there is a story on that. In fact, the stories are more important here. In 1956, Samuelson wrote this paper called The Theory of Public Goods, the theory of public expenditure, the theory of public expenditure. And there were two criticisms on that. One, you have made economics completely mathematics. We don't follow this. And the second is that don't try to say that the theory of public good. This issue has already been discussed by Eric Lindell and Dut Wixell. Here you have, this is an important contribution. You have converted the entire thing into general equilibrium framework, and therefore it is an important thing. But the basic idea is available there. In the next issue of Review of Economics Studies, Samuelson comes out with the paper, slightly longer one. Earlier one was only 4 pages. This is a slightly longer one. He says, diagrammatic exposition of a theory of public expenditure. I mean, these are some small little things you don't get to know, unless you follow the. Now, that shows the way thinking has gone on. Diagrammatic exposition of a theory of public expenditure. And basically he admits, saying that, sorry, I didn't know, because, Lindell's paper were in Swedish. And I didn't know. But after this particular criticism came, I got it translated and then, came up with that. Like this, there are several interesting stories in public finance. Unfortunately, universities don't teach public finance. And the Delhi School of Economics doesn't teach public finance. After Pulin left, there is no public finance teaching there. Now, so nobody in the NIPAP, when I used to get people for interview, first question I would ask is, what is a public good? Nobody knows. If somebody answered it correctly, he gets a job. So, no, why I'm saying this is that this is an important area. And you need to go back and read. I still consider Musgrave's public finance as a very good work. But then if you find it difficult, you can at least read Musgrave and Musgrave, public finance in theory and practice. You get more practice from your American example. So I don't go into the proving of the theory or the point. I just give the intuitive meaning. That's why the stationary bandit and roving bandit thing came to explain what a public good is. From there I tell what a public good is. So, if I suddenly say that it is not, it's non-rival in consumption, non-excludable, people will be rattled. And therefore, I start stating a story and then go into that. So it's meant for the students, meant for policymakers. They also don't have patience to read the theory. So to that extent, I think it will be helpful. Thank you.
So you can take some questions from extras.
Professor Rao, I think we will be showing injustice to the audience if we don't give them keep the forum open for some time at least. Am I right?
Sure.
I think that is the common view. So we will keep the forum open for some time. Question can be raised to the panelists, to Professor Rao, to anyone. We have, particularly I'm asking our young scholars, and of course anyone can.
So you just mentioned about the gender budgeting and the public finance programs that is happening. So I just wanted to inquire about something that Kerala as a state has about 19%, 18% of gender budgeting, like women schemes are there for the whole magnitude of the budget is there for the women category. But at the same time, when it comes to the central, it's about 3%, 3.5%, that's all. And also when we are stating about the central budget, about when we are stating about the scheme A and scheme B, part A and part B, the part B part is getting more of a more benefits, or they are getting more of it. So the schemes which are having at least 30% of women beneficiaries are getting more resource allocation rather than that of a part A, so which is about 100% women beneficiaries. So how is it genuinely benefiting women? How it is genuinely benefiting, serving the purpose of gender budgeting program?
I don't. I can't determine what is the ideal amount of money. It may be 100%. I'm not, that's not. What I am trying to say is that identify, sort of we as researchers identify what are the policies, what are the programs, what are the schemes that would predominantly benefit women, and estimate what it would cost. And then, obviously get out of the legislators and say that this is an important area, we should, get it done. And this is likely to be cost, and then convince them and get them into the budget. So that it is the allocation to that particular, that program goes up, and then with that, the benefit to the women goes up. That's the point I'm making. Just by calculating, saying that this is 5% or 3%, all right, 3%, so what? That's basically, so we need to go to the next step of identifying what all things, for example, Nitish Kumar, when in the first, this thing, started giving a bicycle, free bicycle to the young girls. That was an important initiative. Now, this didn't come from the experts. So we need to identify and then possibly tell them which will help in improving empowerment of women. See, allocation is different from empowerment. At the end of the day, they should have the greater empowerment. That's the point.
So I would like to add to this point that allocation is important, empowerment is important. So when we are stating that if giving gas connection or giving water connection, this is also benefiting the women of the country. So I totally understand that this is inclusiveness part, this is intersectionality part, everything I understand, but it is also kind of reinstating the gender stereotypes that is happening, that women is taking care of the home. So giving benefits to them in that sense will again.
That is not the government job. That's the problem of the society. We need to really deal with it at much larger level, broader level at the society. What do you say, Lekha?
I was, Professor, I was about to suggest that as far as our esteemed guests are concerned who are logged online, we must thank you. I think it's a long day for them. I think I don't want them to stay back for longer. But still, we would, since we must take maximum advantage of the physical presence of Professor Govinda Rao here. So we will continue talking. I think I should release others.
Advantage of physical presence. Get us and beat him up.
I think because I think I would like to thank all those who are logged online, and we thank very much for. I think I officially. Where is the coordinator? You are Kiran. Kiran, are you there? Kiran will say out of thanks officially that we will continue our informal discussion here. We'll continue here, and Professor Govinda Rao is going to be today with us till late night, and Professor Banimurthy. You're not going to. Kiran is there. He came out. I suppose I called him.
Sorry, Kavita, Shanmugam, Lekha, Pinaki. It's been a long day.
Yeah, I think we should not be. I think they had a long day, I suppose. Kiran will say the formal auto thanks for our esteemed friends who logged online. And if there is any question from those who are logged online, please ask. You are always welcome to stay back. But we don't want to tax you too much.
Narayana forgot to say about the KV Nambias.
Yes.
That's
so I wanted to say this. No, he has given the chronology of my development. He has given the chronology of development. I wanted to say this. See, when I was doing my MA in economics at Gujarat University, most of the classes used to be in Gujarat. So I went, there was the head of the department who was a reader, a gentleman called Mahesh Bhatt. And I went and requested him that please give me permission not to attend the class. Because I was not even following Hindi. So not to attend the class. Then that went against me because he called that particular teacher and said that you teach and give notes to the students in Gujarati. What type of a thing? And that fellow took a grudge on me. Anyway, that apart. Then once I finished in the second year, Professor Lakdawala came as a visiting professor, and he was the director of Sardar Patel Institute. And it was a boon to me because somebody is speaking, teaching in English, and Lakdawala is a very balanced teacher. And 2-3 classes there, I was very active. Then one day he said, after you finish your exams, you come and see me. Now I was too naive, village boy, after all. I went to his home. And he said, no problem, you come to the institute. And he gave me the address. So I went to the institute. And there were stalwarts who were asking questions, which included Yogendra Alag, K.K. Subramanian, and T.S. Papola. So I answered them, and then they went, and so Lakdawala called me inside and said that we are going to offer you a research assistant job. I had not gone with any expectation or anything like that. And then I said, I haven't got my MA yet. And he said, no, it doesn't matter. We will send you a letter. You go home, summer vacation. When I came back, they were trying to put me somewhere else. Lakdawala was not there that day. The next day when he came, he said, no. He is going to be working with K.V. Nambiar and me. K.V. Nambiar eventually became a state planning board member here. And in fact, he was an associate professor there. And one of the finest human beings, for a young man, starting his career, very mature. And at those days, he used to have mustache also. Later, he removed it. But very, you could see the man with that maturity. And he said that, he was earlier with the Ministry of Finance and helping the earlier Finance Commission. And he had a lot of data with him. So he said, he started asking me to explore some of the data sources and things like that. I won't say that he had a very good sound theoretical background because he was in the government. I wouldn't. But it was a great help. And, I would challenge him. He was willing to take those. And, didn't say that this young fellow is challenging me sort of thing. Nothing of the sort. I said that what is the difference between direct and indirect taxes? Why should you always prefer direct taxes over indirect taxes? If the indirect taxes are making a, sort of wedge between the producer and consumer prices, direct taxes create a wedge between the income and leisure. There is no difference. But anyway, those are our final niceties. But we worked together for about 6 months and produced a book. It's available in many places. It's commodity taxation in India. Yeah. Now, in fact, Nambiar told me, he told Lakdawala that Govinda Rao should be a co-author. And Lakdawala had his own style. Govind is young. He will learn, and he has done good work. We will express that. And then he have put 3 sentences there, saying that he has collected a huge amount of data and consolidated in the form of tables and then made meaningful analysis, etc. So Kevin, and even when I came here, first time as a student for collecting the data on Kerala, so he said, no, you don't stay anywhere, you stay with me. And I stayed in his house. And he took me to CDS. And that's where we met Gulati, and we had a long discussion. Incidentally, we discovered that my guide and IS Gulati had the same guide. And Alan Pickard produced three PhDs who were in India. One was I.S. Gurati, the senior most of them. Second was, second was that Venkatagiri Gowda. And the third was Shiv Shankar Gupta. Shiv Shankar Gupta worked on one of the finest public finance specialists, very rigorous. Only the politics consumed him. Otherwise, he would have been a fantastic thing. He would tell the students the first book to read. You'll be very surprised. There is a book by Anthony Downs, and that's called The Economic Theory of Democracy. That is the basic book he will ask them to read, the students, because that book didn't get that much of review and attention as Theory of Public Finance by Musgrave, because both the books came in the same year. So everybody focused on Theory of Public Finance by Musgrave. But if anybody wants to get some interest in public choice, The Economic Theory of Democracy by Anthony Downs is the best book that is available. I mean, I benefited enormously by my guide, asking me to read such things. And that's the most important thing the guides do. They tell you to give the right direction. And so, anyway, so that was I think one thing led to another. And I was in touch with for a long time. Then, actually, when the last time came, Ramalingam Iyer actually took me to his house. I met him. He came to Bangalore and stayed earlier once with us. I mean, he's the finest human being. Finest human being.
He's no one.
I know that. I came to know of that. In fact, all my mentors passed away. The last one to pass away was Richard Byrd, who passed away when I wrote an article on him, because he had done a lot of tax reform work in India. And about a month earlier, we had the email exchanges. He asked me a question on GST. He said, Govinda, why is it that you people, when all things are known, you people mess up your reforms? I had no answer. And then I wrote this article and this was given to his family. And Richard was, again, there is a very peculiar response to this thing. Richard Byrd was my examiner, a PhD examiner, and I had no idea. So it came, and he was so meticulous that he had sent his report within 15 days. And both the reports had come, but my guy had to write a report. He was not doing it. Then finally I threatened him saying that I am coming to Isabel. Immediately he sent it. But anyway, after about 10, 12 years of my getting PhD, see, I got a fellowship from to go to Canada. I went to Toronto University. I wrote to him saying that I will come. He said he will make the necessary arrangement there for the office and all that. Whereas I was more impressed with the paper by Albert Britton. There is in 1969, he wrote a paper in Canadian Journal of Economics called The Theory of Grants. This is the title of the paper. So I went there and we discussed. There were a lot of discussions that took place around that time. On one occasion, something which I was mentioning, he said, Govinda, this particular argument, there is this student of Shiv Gupta, and his name is also some Rab. He makes this argument, and I think it's a right argument. I said, you're talking to the same fellow. That is the memory that man had. And in fact, when he was 70, they had a conference in Georgia State University, Atlanta. I insisted, in the list of invitees, he told those people, is Roy Bal, that Govinda should be called. I was one of the, so they had some joke going 90, 80, 70. Richard Musgrave was 90. Oliver Oldman was 70, because earlier there was a book on fiscal policy for developing countries, edited volume by Richard Byrd and Oliver Oldman. So this man is, 70. They would. There, obviously, we were all talking, and Musgrave, I met Musgrave several times actually in conferences in Tokyo. Short man, a German of German origin. He would make, his earliest work was a paper in 1929 on the merit groups. And it's the most controversial paper in that sense. So he was asked to speak on that. Without any support, just a standing mic, he spoke for 45 minutes on merit codes, a man who was 90. It's an amazing sight. And, that was one of the, but when I read, I think this is something all of you should read. The MIT Press, in mid-90s, there was a symposium, a week-long symposium in the University of Munich. And the two main actors were James Buchanan and Richard Musgrave. And one of them saying that the state is a necessary evil. It is necessary because, public goods have to be provided, markets fail. But it should be confined only to the clear cases of market failure. It should not expand because it impinges on the freedom of the individuals. State comes and impinges on the freedom of the individuals. And Musgrave comes up and says that, state, the question is how benevolent the state is. And when Musgrave argues for the same merit group, saying that anything can be argued for merit group. Even if you give, even if you say that the government will start selling alcohol, that is also merit because I am looking after the health of these people, so I will do that. Basically it's a question of regulation. So when he said it, script answer by James Buchanan is that, so I don't understand this. I don't understand merit good, concept of merit good at all. But this is some interesting thing, at least when you need to read it, not with an ideological bias. Read it for what it is. You may have later on whatever this thing you want to make up. And of course, Albert would tell me about some of the internal politics they have. And in fact, Buchanan's earlier work was done with somebody else, and this fellow wanted to play politics to see that in the Nobel Prize, other fellow's name was not included. There are lots of things. I miss those because Albert was a great guy. I sent him to Cochin when he came to ISEC for a month. He and his wife had come, so I sent him to Cochin. And he was staying in a hotel, and then in the morning he was going to the sea and then came back, and he came back and said, Govinda, this is a fascinating place. And he saw the fishermen getting fish and then auctioning taking place. So he says, I can actually do some work on auctioneering. Anyway, these are, now I feel that I'm an orphan. I used to have a lot of, discussions with Chelaya. Not always agreed, oftentimes, but the man's habit is he will have a big quarrel, and then when he comes out, he's as Govind, I was telling something. Suddenly the thing gets. Thank you. Anyway, so
we come to the last part of the book launch function.
Yeah.
Oh, you are here. Now I see that.
Yeah. On behalf of GIFT community, it is my privilege to offer a vote of thanks, especially when we have Professor Rao here. Sir, thank you for accepting our invitation, traveling all the way to be here. It is our privilege to celebrate and honor you. And I would like to thank Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac. Despite having a flight at 6:30, he took the time to join this occasion just because it is a book launch and honoring you. And I would like to thank all the panelists who joined us both online and offline for sharing their experiences, their fond memories, and how they learned and benefited by working with you. And I would like to thank Professor Joseph for taking the initiative and organizing this event. And I would like to thank all the participants who joined us online and offline. And I would like to thank all the IT team, Mr. Varun and Shaiju, for making this event a seamless process. Thank you. We had a long afternoon. Thank you. I would like to finish it very fast. Thank you once again.
Okay, I think Professor Bani also has taken the trouble of coming all the way. Thank you, Professor Bani Murthy. And we want to see all of us together one day. That is, this online should not be prompting your laziness. You are all become very lazy. We are not you. We are all become lazy.